Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Robert, 30 years old, a systems analyst, always believed a healthy marriage needed personal space. His wife Bethany, 27, worked as a marketing manager at a boutique agency. She was outgoing and full of energy. They'd been together 5 years, married for 3, and everything had been going well, until 18 months ago. The early years were exactly as Robert had dreamed. They shared chores, planned vacations together, laughed at each other's terrible jokes. Bethany was vibrant, always talking about creative campaigns. Robert, more reserved, admired that energy which perfectly complemented his calm nature. At first came the overtime hours, always with plausible explanations about meetings. Robert accepted it because he trusted her, and because his own job sometimes required emergency on-call shifts. Then came the trips. A marketing conference, 3 days filled with brief texts and generic photos. The second trip was a personal development retreat. She came back glowing, yet avoided giving details. The third time was when Robert first felt that tightening in his chest, a weekend alone because she was feeling suffocated. The trips became routine, every 6 or 8 weeks. Bethany always had ready-made answers about finding her own voice, about independence, phrases pulled straight from self-help books that left Robert without counter-arguments. But something gnawed at him. The details didn't add up. Bethany came back tanned from mountain retreats. Her suitcases held more party dresses than meditation clothes. There was a receipt from an expensive restaurant dated during a trip when she claimed to be fasting. When he brought it up, Bethany accused him of invading her privacy. Robert felt guilty, wondering if he was just paranoid, maybe it was leftover baggage from his parents' divorce. He decided to trust more and question less. But the distance between them grew with every trip, every silent return, every shallow conversation replacing the deep talks they used to have. It all fell apart on an autumn Tuesday. Over breakfast, Robert raised the issue of finances. They'd planned to save for a bigger house, yet their savings barely grew. When he suggested cutting back, including Bethany's trips, she exploded. How dare he control her money? Restrict her freedom? Robert tried to explain it was about joint planning, but Bethany was already on her feet. I need to get out of here. I need space to think. You're suffocating me, Robert. 20 minutes later, she came downstairs with her suitcase and purse, eyes avoiding his. Where are you going? I don't know. Somewhere far. I need to think about us, about whether I even want this anymore. Bethany made a vague gesture that took in the whole house. Don't call me. I'll reach out when I'm ready. And she left. Robert stood frozen, trying to understand how a budget discussion had turned into this. That night, he called his mother-in-law Margaret to see if Bethany had mentioned anything. Margaret sounded surprised and worried, promising to try talking to her daughter. On the second day, Robert worked from home. While putting away Bethany's clothes, he noticed something odd. Items were missing. The red dress she'd worn on their anniversary. Her favorite leather jacket. Several blouses. Expensive lingerie he'd never seen her wear. Some heels. It wasn't just the suitcase from this trip. Bethany had been gradually removing things. For how long? And where had they gone? It was almost 2 in the afternoon when the doorbell rang. Robert opened the door, and froze. Margaret stood there crying. Tears streamed down her cheeks, leaving trails of smudged mascara. She held a suitcase and her purse. At 54, a retired schoolteacher, Robert had never seen her like this, not even at her husband's funeral had she seemed so shattered. Margaret? What's wrong? Please, come in. Margaret stumbled in, nearly tripping. Robert guided her to the sofa, where she collapsed. For a long moment, she just cried. Robert tentatively touched her shoulder, utterly lost. We need to talk about my daughter, Margaret finally said, voice broken. About Bethay. About what she's doing. About what she's been doing. Margaret took a deep breath and opened her purse. She pulled out an old cell phone, a model from 3 or 4 years ago. Bethany left this at my house, my place. She came by yesterday before her trip, said she needed to pick up some things from the attic. But she forgot this under the bed. Why would she have an old phone? That's what I wondered. So I charged it. Anne. Robert, I didn't want to look, but something told me I should. Margaret unlocked the phone, it had no password. A secure messaging app. She scrolled to a conversation with a contact saved only as D. Robert read, each word hitting him like a physical blow. The messages dated back over 2 years. Casual chats had quickly turned intimate. D. called Bethany my love, my life. Bethany replied with heart emojis and messages that made it clear this was far more than friendship. They talked about when they'd meet next, about her counting the days until their next encounter, about how hard it was to fake normalcy at home. Margaret scrolled further. Photos appeared, each worse than the last. Bethany in swimwear on unfamiliar beaches. Elegant restaurants, smiling with a genuine happiness Robert hadn't seen in her for a long time. That sparkle in her eyes he thought she'd lost, but she'd actually been saving it for someone else. And then, pictures with a man. Dark-haired, tall, neatly trimmed beard, wide smile. Hugging, kissing. In one photo, he held her by the waist, her feet off the ground, in front of a beach cabin. Bethany laughed in a way Robert hadn't seen in at least a year. There's more. Margaret went back to recent messages, from just weeks ago. Bethany and Dee were discussing their next trip with intimate detail. He'd sent photos of a resort, asking if she liked the accommodations. Bethany replied it was perfect, she could hardly wait for a whole week with him this time. A full week. Not a weekend. Not a few days. A whole week living like a couple with another man. Robert looked up from the photos, his hands trembling slightly. All her trips were to meet him, Margaret finished, fresh tears welling. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. I cross-checked the photo dates with my memories. Remember that marketing conference she said she attended last November? These photos are from there, Robert. And there's not a single convention center in any of them, just beaches, luxury hotels, romantic dinners. The personal development retreats in January? Vacations with him. The reflection weekends? Extended rendezvous. Every single one was with him. Robert handed the phone back to Margaret, unable to look any longer. His mind raced, trying to grasp the magnitude. 2 years. Bethany had been doing this for nearly 2 years. Every time she came back changed, distant, he'd thought she was losing herself, when in truth she was finding someone else. This wasn't about personal discovery. It was about maintaining a double life, with D. Who is he? I don't know his full name. But I kept reading, trying to understand how deep this lie went. It seems they met at an actual conference 2 years ago, digital marketing, I think. They connected, started talking, and things escalated fast. She'd travel to see him every few weeks. Sometimes he'd come here, staying at hotels half an hour away. There are messages about lunchtime meetups, about how risky but thrilling it was to see each other so close to home. Robert walked to the window, legs heavy. Outside, everything looked absurdly normal. Neighbors watering gardens, kids riding bikes, trees swaying gently. Inside, everything he knew lay shattered into a million pieces. 2 years of lies. 2 years of, I love you, in the morning before she left for work, dinners where he'd ask about her day and she'd spin detailed fictions, nights sleeping beside her without knowing she was thinking of someone else, planning to be with someone else, counting the days until she saw someone else. How many times had Bethany lain next to him, texting that man while Robert slept? How many times had she cancelled plans with him to be available for her lover? How many lies had she told, looking him straight in the eyes, without the slightest hint of hesitation? "Why are you showing me this?" Robert finally asked, his voice hoarse, still facing the window. "Why didn't you confront Bethany first?" "Because you deserve to know the truth," Margaret replied, her voice now firm beneath her maternal pain. "Because I raised my daughter to be better than this, and she failed. She failed you, failed me as a mother, failed herself as a person. And because," Margaret's voice faltered, "because I don't want you to be as blind as I was with her father." Robert turned, confused. Margaret never spoke about Bethany's father, who'd left when she was a teenager. It was a family taboo. "Bethany's father cheated on me for years before I found out," Margaret said, staring at her own hands as if they held secrets. "I ignored the signs, the absences, the lies that now seem so obvious. And when I finally learned the truth, it was too late. He already had another full family in another state, another woman, 2 kids who didn't even know I existed. I lost years I could have used to rebuild my life because I chose blindness, because I chose to believe the lies. The truth was just too painful. I won't let you make the same mistake I did. I won't watch another good man be destroyed by a woman who doesn't deserve him." Robert returned to the sofa, sitting down heavier than he intended. The weight of Margaret's revelation, on top of his own discoveries, was almost unbearable. Margaret reached out, touching his arm with maternal firmness. "There's one more thing you need to know," she said, hesitating as if the next words were too poisonous. "A conversation from last night, before she came to my house to pick up her things. She was arguing with him, with David. He was growing impatient, asking when she'd finally leave you, when they could stop hiding, when they could go public with their relationship." "And Bethany's answer?" Margaret paused, wiping away fresh tears. But Robert needed to know. He needed to know how deep the betrayal went. "What did she say?" "That she was working on it. That she was creating strategic situations to make you look like the villain, so that when she filed for divorce, she'd have a ready-made justification. So family and friends would side with her. So no one would judge her for walking out on the marriage." Margaret took a shaky breath. "Your fight about money yesterday? She provoked it on purpose, Robert. To claim you were controlling and financially abusive. To give herself the perfect excuse to leave. To be with him now, and later say she'd been forced to flee a suffocating marriage." Robert felt something cold and hard settle in his chest, replacing pain with something more focused. This wasn't just betrayal. It was calculated manipulation, meticulously orchestrated over months. Bethany wasn't confused or lost. She was executing a plan, orchestrating the end of their marriage in a way that painted her as the victim and him as the oppressor. All those recent accusations of suffocation and control weren't spontaneous emotional reactions. They were pieces being carefully placed on a board only she could see, setting the stage for her victimized exit. "Is she with him now?" Margaret nodded. "The latest messages show them planning to meet at a coastal resort. They're probably there now." They sat in silence. It was Margaret who broke it. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet. But I won't stand by and do nothing. I won't let her rewrite our story as if I were the villain. Can I stay in the guest room for a few days? I don't want to go home right now." "Of course. Stay as long as you need." That night, Robert didn't sleep. He researched divorce laws, infidelity as grounds, asset division, admissible evidence. His anger turned into cold determination. By morning, he'd made decisions. He copied all the photos and messages to an encrypted drive. He called a divorce attorney and scheduled a consultation for that afternoon. Then he called a private investigator. "I need to know exactly where my wife is, and I need photos. Documentation. Anything that can be used legally," Robert explained to the investigator. "Frank, giving him details about Bethany and her lover. "If she's using her phone, I can track her location within hours," Frank replied. "Photos depend, if it's a public place, maybe tonight. Private resort, a day or two. Do it as fast as possible. Absolute discretion. I don't want her to know I'm investigating." At the consultation, Daniel Hutchins, an experienced attorney, reviewed the evidence. Proven infidelity helps a lot. With this level of documentation, excellent. But I'll be honest, Robert. In our state, even with proof, asset division tends to be equitable. You won't necessarily come out ahead financially. It's not about money. It's about not letting her rewrite history. Making sure people know the truth, that I wasn't the controlling husband. Daniel nodded. Understood. On that front, we can help. I'll prepare the paperwork. Once you have all the evidence, including from the investigator, we'll file. My advice? Don't confront her yet. Let her come back, let her think she's in control. When we're ready, you'll catch her off guard. Frank called on the morning of the 4th day. Found your wife. Resort on the coast, 4 hours from here. Got photos of her and the guy. Sending everything now via encrypted email. The photos showed Bethany in a blue bikini, laughing as the dark-haired man held her in the pool. Dining at a seaside restaurant, hands intertwined. A kiss under string lights. Each image stamped with date and time, irrefutable proof. Robert forwarded everything to Daniel, who approved. Perfect. I'll file the papers tomorrow. When does she get back? In 3 days. Bethany had sent a brief text saying she needed more time and would return over the weekend. Great. Let her come back. The next day, my process server will hand-deliver the documents in person. You might want someone with you when it happens, just in case. Robert asked Margaret and called his brother Tom, explaining what was needed. Tom said he'd be there without hesitation. When Bethany returned late Saturday afternoon, Robert was in the living room with a book he wasn't reading. Margaret was in the guest room. He heard the key in the lock. Bethany walked in with her suitcase, hair tousled, skin sun-kissed. She looked happy, happier than she'd been at home in months. And that hurt more than Robert expected. Hi. I'm back. I see that, Robert replied, not looking up. Bethany set down her suitcase and stepped further inside. About our fight. I've thought a lot while I was away. About us. About what I want. And I think we need to talk. Seriously. About the future of our marriage. I don't know if it's working anymore. I feel like we've grown in different directions. Robert finally looked at her. He searched for any trace of remorse, of guilt. There was none, just cold determination. Different directions. Interesting way to put it. Bethany frowned. Don't you think? The distance. The lack of connection. Oh, I definitely felt something. But it wasn't a lack of connection on my part. The mood shifted. Bethany stared at him, something changing in her expression. What does that mean? The doorbell rang. Robert stood and walked to the door, Bethany following, confused. He opened it. A process server held a thick envelope. Robert Mitchell? No, but you can hand it to me. It's for my wife, Bethany Mitchell. The server handed it over. Legal documents. Good luck. Robert closed the door and held out the envelope. For you. Bethany took it, eyebrows furrowed. What is this? Why don't you open it? With trembling fingers, Bethany tore it open and pulled out the papers. Robert watched the exact moment it hit her. All color drained from her face. Her eyes widened. Divorce petition? What are you? Keep reading. It's very detailed. Bethany flipped through. Robert saw when she reached the sections listing grounds: adultery, ongoing infidelity, deceit, each accusation backed by attached evidence. Photos. Messages. Dates. Locations. How did you? How did I find out? Robert finished. Funny you should ask. While you were finding yourself on the coast with David, yes, I know his name, I was busy too. Finding the truth. Compiling evidence. Talking to lawyers. You followed me? Spied on me? Bethany's voice rose, indignant. Robert almost laughed. The irony of you accusing me of invasion after 2 years of lying isn't lost on me. But no, I didn't follow you. Though a detective did. Took some beautiful photos. You two are very photogenic together. Bethany recoiled as if slapped. Robert, I can explain. Can you? Can you explain 2 years of betrayal? All the lies about conferences and retreats? How you deliberately created situations to make me look like the villain? Because I have all those conversations, Bethany. Every message. Every photo. Every plan you made with your lover about ending our marriage by painting me as the problem. Bethany's legs gave out. She leaned against the wall, papers falling. My old phone, she whispered. I left it at my mom's house. Sure did, Margaret said, appearing in the hallway, her expression hardened. And I found it. And saw exactly what kind of person my daughter has become. Mom? Bethany looked between Margaret and Robert, confusion and panic swirling. You're on his side? Against me? I'm on the side of truth, Margaret replied, her voice steady despite tears in her eyes. On the side of decency. You didn't just cheat on your husband. You did it systematically and calculatingly. You manipulated situations. Lied to everyone. And you would have kept lying, wouldn't you? Bethany squeezed her eyes shut, tears finally falling. But Robert felt no urge to comfort her. These tears weren't from remorse, they were from getting caught. I never meant to hurt anyone. But you did, Robert said. Deeply. You shattered my trust beyond repair. And you know what's worst? If you'd come to me 2 years ago, when you met David, if you'd been honest about wanting out, I would have respected that. It would have hurt, but I'd have understood. People sometimes fall for others. But you chose to lie. To cheat. To use me as cover while living a double life. David said you'd never let me go, Bethany said defensively. Said men like you make divorce impossible, that you'd destroy my reputation. Robert felt something cold settle in. So you took marriage advice from your lover? Convenient. Hypocritical. Do you realize you're describing exactly what you planned to do to me? Destroy my reputation? Make everyone think I was the controlling husband? Bethany had no answer. She looked at the scattered papers, at her mother with crossed arms, at Robert watching her with unexpected calm. What do you want? To destroy me? No. I just want the truth. I want a clean divorce where the real reasons are documented. I want people to know, when they ask what happened, that it wasn't because I was controlling. It's because you made choices. And now you have to live with the consequences. You're being vengeful. I'm being fair. Vengeance would be exposing you publicly, sending those photos and messages to your entire family, friends, co-workers, making you feel even a fraction of the humiliation I felt. But I won't. I'll do everything through legal channels. You'll sign the papers. We'll divide assets according to the law. And we'll go our separate ways. You can keep David, if he still wants you after realizing it's no longer forbidden excitement. Bethany fell silent. Then she walked past Robert, went upstairs. Drawers opened and closed. 15 minutes later, she came down with 2 suitcases, grabbed her car keys, and headed for the door. "My lawyer will be in touch," she said without looking at him. "I'll be waiting." And she was gone. The door closed, the car started, then silence. Robert stood there, looking at the scattered papers, processing that his marriage was over. Margaret approached, her hand on his shoulder. "You handled yourself well. Kept your dignity. It doesn't feel like a victory." "It's not. But it's a fresh start. And sometimes, that's the best we can hope for." The following months unfolded as Daniel had predicted. The divorce proceeded smoothly, given the circumstances. Bethany tried to dispute the allegations, but with documented evidence, her lawyer advised her to accept. Asset division was equitable. Robert kept the house, everything he wanted. News spread through their social circles. Robert kept details private, simply saying they'd grown in different directions. But Margaret, true to her belief in honesty, didn't lie when friends asked. The truth leaked, and soon whispers of Bethany's infidelity circulated. Robert didn't take pleasure in it. There was no satisfaction in seeing Bethany's reputation tarnished, just deep melancholy, sadness for what could have been. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Robert was rebuilding his life. He started weekly therapy, working through not just the pain of infidelity but also the psychological manipulation and lost time. He picked up old hobbies, photography, hiking, Saturday cooking classes. Tom visited often with his family. Margaret became a constant presence, more like a mother now than an ex-mother-in-law. One spring afternoon, Robert was photographing flowers in the park when he ran into Linda, a designer who'd worked with Bethany. They chatted casually. Linda mentioned she'd recently seen Bethany. She was with that guy, David. But honestly, she didn't look good. She looked tired. Drained. He was talking loudly at her about something, and she just took it. It was uncomfortable to watch. Robert murmured something neutral, but inside, he felt a pang, not of satisfaction, but of sadness. Bethany had destroyed a solid marriage for a fantasy that apparently wasn't so golden after all. But that sadness was no longer his to carry. Bethany had made her choices. She'd have to live with them, just as Robert was learning to live with the consequences in his own life. Robert finished photographing, smiled at Linda, and walked on, literally and metaphorically. His life was no longer defined by Bethany's betrayal. It was defined by his own choices, experiences, and growth. That evening at home, Robert looked around. With Bethany's things gone, he'd redecorated, new photos on the walls, furniture rearranged. A new armchair now sat where she used to, filling the empty space that once ached. Margaret was in the kitchen making tea, as she often did on weeknights. She'd moved permanently into a nearby apartment, wanting to be close but giving him space. She had dinner with him several times a week, and Robert was grateful. "Are you okay?" Margaret asked when he came in. "I am," Robert replied, and realized it was true. He wasn't fully healed. Wounds from betrayal take time. But he was better. Moving forward. Rebuilding. Good. You deserve to be happy, Robert. You deserved it all that time my daughter was stealing from you. And you deserve it now, building something new. They drank their tea in comfortable silence. Robert thought about how drastically life can change. 2 years of lies exposed in an afternoon. A marriage ending in a single confrontation. And now, months later, a new life taking shape. It wasn't the life he'd planned when he'd knelt on that snowy pier years ago. But it was his life, honest, real, free from deception. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Outside, the sun set slowly, painting the sky in oranges and pinks. And inside the home that was truly his, Robert Mitchell allowed himself to think not about the stolen past, but about the future ahead, a future built on truth. And that, finally, felt like a real new beginning. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.